Some statistics I came across. Hallmark estimates that 150 million Mother's Day cards are sent out each year. 150 million. That's double than Father's Day, just in case you were wondering. All of us dads know that, but it's the third largest greeting card holiday of the year. That Americans spend an average of $105 on Mother's Day gifts. Some of you are wondering, where was I when that happened? Sorry. The phone rings more often on Mother's Day than on Father's Day. The difference is Father's Day calls are more collect than Mother's Day calls. And this is what I did not know, that there are the busiest day of the year at car washes are the Saturday before Mother's Day. I don't know how that ties together, but somehow that is an important statistic. Another thing that I came across was that there was a study done that a particular lawyer, an attorney, did a monetary value of a wife's services in the home, and he listed the various functions she performs and tried to put a value to them. And he came across a list that I have up there of chauffeur, gardener, family counselor, maintenance worker, and you can add more to these, cleaning woman, housekeeper, cook, errand runner, bookkeeper, interior decorator, caterer, dietitian, secretary, hostess, all these different things. And he came up with today's labor market with a figure of $51,220 a year for all the things that mom does. That paycheck, you will get it when you get to heaven. When you get home, it'll be there waiting for you because God thinks what you do is way out there important. And that'll be nothing compared to what he will reward you with. I also read this week about a cartoon of a mom who, it was the end of the day, her hair was in a mess, the kids were just running wild in the house was a mess, and her husband comes in, he's all dressed in his suit, he's got his briefcase, and he looks at her and he has that same look that women hate to see, like, well, what did you do all day? And her response was, well, you know, and every time you ask that, what I do all day, well, today I didn't do it, and here it is. This is what it looks like when I don't do it. And we don't give enough thanks for them. And then there's the challenge of the kids. The challenge that they have of just raising, just being there and bringing kids along. And one particular passage in the Bible that I read this week I thought was interesting, referring to that, that Jesus went out, and this is what it says in Matthew 15, Jesus went out from there, departed to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and behold, a woman of Canaan came from that region and cried out to him, saying, have mercy on me, O Lord, Son of David. My daughter is severely demon-possessed. But he answered her not a word. Now that always confused me until I got to be the parent of a teenager. And I'm thinking, Jesus walking away saying, well, lady, your child just became a teenager. And I know demon possession and adolescence have a lot of similar characteristics that go with them. That's probably what I'm reading into that passage. And it is a challenge to raise kids. And moms are on the front line. And the Bible is full of famous moms. And a lot of pulpits today, they'll be talking about Hannah, the mother of Samuel. They'll be talking about Mary, the mother of Jesus. They'll be talking about Supermom, who's listed in Proverbs chapter 31. I'm not going to talk about any of those. I'm going to talk about some lesser-known names. And you know, as I thought about this yesterday, I thought you guys might like to see the most popular names just for a reference point. So I listed those up there. The popular names of 2007 for the male and the female. Go ahead and just run them down. Jacob, Michael, Ethan, Joshua, Daniel, Christopher. I'm not calling roll. William, Matthew, Andrew. Female, Emily. There you go. Over ears. Isabella. Emma, Ava. You never would have thought of that, but I think that's the most popular this year. Madison, Sophia, Olivia, Abigail, Hannah, and Elizabeth. Those sounds like actresses out of the 40s. But then if you go back 100 years, these were the most popular names that you have 100 years ago. And we have some ladies, not that they were named that 100 years ago, but they're probably carrying those names that are sitting here with us today. Popular names. Well, I'm going to give you some today, and I guarantee there's nobody in here by the two of the names that we have listed here. Name number one is Rizpah. Rizpah. Rizpah is a lady, and I apologize for the the ways that I'm going to describe these moms, the different segments of this sermon this morning. But Rizpah was a mother whose children hung around. They weren't boomerang kids. Some of y'all are thinking, well, I know what that's like. I got kids that can't get them to go out of the house and get on with life. But Rizpah had a very interesting situation. She was a concubine of King Saul. And this particular passage you're going to look at this morning happens in 2 Samuel 21, where King Saul has died and David has ascended to the throne. And David, being ascended to the throne, is in the midst of a 3-year famine. And he's been praying to God every year for God to solve the problem that he is in the midst of as this leader. Every year he's praying for this. He has his national day of prayer, and he is serious about it. Praying for God to figure out how to fix this crisis. And God speaks to him. And it has to do with Rizpah. She is connected with how God speaks. Now, a concubine was an interesting position in the past. It was a person who had very little status or influence or power in a family. It was considered a secondary wife. They had more than one wife, which is not what we do today. But they would have concubines, which would be kind of a secondary wife. They might be somebody who came along that may have been actually purchased, may have been won in battle, may have been won in a card game. I don't know, but they just came along as they came along. And often there would be children through them. And King Saul had 2 kids through Rizpah. And I'm going to read starting in verse 1 of 2 Samuel 21 and read about King Saul in this situation. It says, "Now there was a famine in the days of David for 3 years, year after year, and David sought the presence of the Lord. And the Lord said, 'It is for Saul and his bloody house, because he put the Gibeonites to death.' So the king called the Gibeonites and spoke to them. Now the Gibeonites were the remnant of the Amorites. The sons of Israel made a covenant with them. But Saul had sought to kill them in his zeal for the sons of Israel and Judah. Thus David said to the Gibeonites, 'What should I do for you? And how can I make atonement that you may bless the inheritance of the Lord?'" He's trying to figure out what the solution is for God to remove this famine. And God directs him back to the fact that the Gibeonites were an interesting group out of Joshua. When the children of Israel went into the promised land and began to conquer, the Gibeonites said, "We don't want to mess with them. They're going to destroy us. What we'll do is we will make it look like we've come from a long distance away." So they put together an elaborate display of clothing and water bottles that made it look like they'd come from a long distance where they hadn't. And they said, "We're from a long distance away. We want to make a covenant with you." The Israelites made a covenant with them, and then it was found out they were just from over the hill. But the covenant stayed, but they were made to be servants in the land. Well, Saul comes along and tries to wipe them out. And God wasn't happy with that because a covenant had been made in his name. And so when David ascends the throne, famine is happening. David tries to seek God's heart about what the problem is, and God identifies that this is the problem. He calls in the Gibeonites and says, "What do you want me to do?" And this is what they say. The Gibeonites said to him, "We have no concern of silver or gold with Saul or his house, nor is it for us to put any man to death in Israel." And he said, "I will do for you whatever you say." So they said to the king, "The man who consumed us, who planned to exterminate us from remaining within the border of Israel, let 7 men from his sons be given to us. We'll hang them before the Lord in Gibeah of Saul, the chosen of the Lord." And the king said, "I will give them." They asked, they didn't want to have any monetary gift given to them. They didn't even want to attack any part of the people of Israel. All they wanted was 7 representative sons of Saul, the one who tried to wipe them out, exterminate them, to be given to them. And to make a long story short, David said, "Yes, I will do that." They took those 7. 2 of them were Rizpah's sons. And it goes on to say that they took them, hung them, killed them, and left them out in the open for all the world to see as a reminder of all that had been agreed upon, all that had been done, and had been reconciled. They did this on the first day of the harvest. Rizpah went out there, and jumping ahead, the Bible says that Rizpah, showing an amazing love for her children, Verse 10. Go ahead and jump ahead to verse 10. It says she took sackcloth, spread it for herself on a rock from the beginning of the harvest until it rained on them from the sky, and she allowed neither the birds of the sky to rest on them, nor the beasts of the field by night. She went out there, put sackcloth down, which was a show of mourning, and she protected their bodies from humiliation. From the time of the harvest to the time when the rains came. Folks, that was 6 months. She spent half a year out there, 6 months, protecting her kids, fighting off the birds that would come in the day and the wild beasts that would come at night, and not letting their bodies, she couldn't save their life, but she tried to protect their bodies from disgrace and humiliation. Now that is a mom who goes the distance. You know, moms will be there. Moms are there a lot of times when dads aren't. Our moms, they came along, and we're surrounded by a lot of amazing men who have been there. Who have been there protecting and providing and loving their families. But there's an epidemic in America of many men who have walked away and often left a mom who would not walk away from her children. Very rare to see a mom do anything like that. And Rizpah stayed there. She stayed there and she protected the bodies of her children for half a year. And that is an amazing lady. It goes on in verse 11 to say, and it was told David that Rizpah, the concubine of Saul, had done. That David went and took the bones of Saul, took the bones of Jonathan, his son, and the men that had been hanged there. Just to quickly go through this, he took them all. He brought them back and buried those bones. And then it says in verse 14, at the end of that after that, God was moved by prayer for the land. You know, folks, when we start doing what the heart of God tells us to do, God's going to change some things. The problem is we're not really listening. God's not going to grab us and shake us and say, okay, since you don't care, I'm going to make you listen to me. I mean, he has his way of getting our attention, but his desire is for us to seek his heart. David, as their leader, was seeking the heart of God. And he heard what was on God's heart. And it was addressed, and things dramatically changed. And in the midst of all that bigger story, you've got the evidence of a mother who had this amazing love for her children, even after they had perished. She's a godly mother, and a godly mother is an inspiration to all those who are around her. There's a story that I came across of an 18-year-old man who had multiple sclerosis. He was trying to become an Eagle Scout, and part of what you had to do to be an Eagle Scout was to run or go on a 16-mile hike. He was in a wheelchair. He went for 10 miles in that wheelchair before his arms would just go no farther. And finally, with 6 miles left to go, he crawled the remaining 6 miles. And he became an Eagle Scout, and he accomplished it all, but certainly somebody who would be an inspiration. Rizpah is an inspiration to King David. King David hears what she has done, and King David responds in his own way, collecting all the bones and giving them proper burial, but following the lead and the inspiration of a very loving mother. Next mother is already up there. It's Jochebed. Jochebed, a mother whose son was in the Nile. I bet you wonder who that is. Moses was put in the Nile. That's the point of that one. But you probably didn't know Moses' mother's name was Jochebed. And Jochebed is another one of those non-beautiful names that you find in the Bible, but she was certainly a beautiful lady. And Rizpah would not give up. She wouldn't give up her children. She stayed there with them. Jochebed had to give up because the king, the new Pharaoh, made a decree that made her have to give up Moses at a certain point where she could no longer protect him. You see, this king came up to power. He did not know of Joseph, who came to Egypt long ago, whom God used in a miraculous way to protect Egypt from a 7-year crisis, a 7-year economic famine that was hitting them. And he didn't care about that. He didn't care about God. And so he didn't care about the people of Joseph, other than they were multiplying and getting so big and so used that he worried about them as a fighting force against Egypt. And so he made a decree that all the young men would be killed. If you ever watched Ten Commandments, you know that this is a familiar story. But Jochebed was a mother who gave birth to Moses. It says in verse 1 of chapter 2 of Exodus, from the house of Levi, married a daughter of Levi, that the woman conceived and bore a son. She saw that he was beautiful. She hid him for 3 months. Here she's hiding Moses for 3 months. She found out she could hide him no longer. She made a wicker basket, covered it with tar and pitch. She put the child into it, set it among the reeds by the bank of the Nile, and his sister stood at a distance to see what would happen. Something true about mothers also is that mothers take great risk for those that they love. It's a risk, number one, just to have a child. That bringing a child into this world is a great risk. And if God wanted to extinguish the human race, he wouldn't have to send another flood. All he needs to do is to transfer having babies from women to men. We'd have one maybe, and that would be it. That would get rid of the human race. But moms are willing to take risk, personal risk upon themselves. Here, by the very birth and 3 months of hiding Moses every day, every night, every noise, every visitor just wondering if the baby was being discovered. And then finally, the risk of placing this baby into God's hands by placing Moses in the river, which is not one of my first choices of life-saving techniques of putting your child in the river. But it is if you know who else comes to that river and who might be there and take pity on him. And that's what verse 5 says. It says, the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe in the Nile. Her maidens walking along the side of the Nile. They saw the basket among the reeds. Sent her maid. She saw the basket, sent her maid, and she brought it to her. She opened it and looked at it and said, this child is one of the Hebrew children. The sister who's been waiting runs up, says, I know a woman who can nurse that child. And Moses is turned back over to his mother until he is weaned. And named Moses because he was drawn out of the river. God had this great plan at work. And mothers' sacrifice, their willingness to take this risk is always a part of God's plan. God had a very special child here who was born at the right time in history. He was going to be put in the right household where he could have the influence he needed by the very fact that Pharaoh's daughter would bring him into her home. And God allowed this. Then God allowed a very godly mother to be there for those initial first years until he was weaned. You've heard it said that all you ever needed to know to live life what you learned in kindergarten. Well, Moses needed to learn that before he got out of that house. And then the decisions that he would ultimately make later in life for God, the basis, foundation of them were while he was in that house. So mothers, like Jochebed, have a unique place in the plan of God. A unique place in the plan of God for that child. God put a special commitment, a special love in their life. And he uses that for his own glory to work out his plan for those kids. A man named James Keller said this. He said, every mother has the breathtaking privilege of sharing with God in the creation of a new life. That God places the privilege, the opportunity, when he places that child in your arms, that new life, he's entrusting you to take that child and bring that child up in a home that honors him, honors his word, and that child will be taught what it means to know the God who created him. That is that special calling, that unique part of the plan that we are gifted with, to put that into the life of a child as God entrusts that life to us. And you know, there's something unique about a child that God is imprinted upon them, that they will be drawn to mom and to dad, especially to mom in a very unique way. If you've ever heard of Irma Bombeck, Irma Bombeck talks about when her child was about 4 or 5 years old, but she had about 3 of them, and one of them was that age, that she considered motherhood a temporary condition and not a calling. And it was at that time in her life that she was totally exhausted. She thought this will pass. One afternoon, she had 3 kids with her. They were all in tow at a supermarket. And she said she had one of these supermarket baskets that all 4 wheels went all different directions, just not one of those good days. Her toddler son got away from her, went outside the door, raced up to a bubblegum machine with a glass dome. In a voice that shattered the glass, he said, "Give me, give me." I told him I would give him what for if he didn't stop shouting and get in the car. I physically tried to pry his body from around the bubblegum machine. He pulled the entire thing over. Glass and balls of bubblegum went all over the parking lot, and we now had attracted a sizable crowd. I told him he would never see another cartoon as long as he lived. And if he didn't control his temper, he's going to be making license plates for the state. He tried to stifle his sobs. He looked around at the staring crowd. Then he did something that I was to remember for the rest of my life. In his helpless quest for comfort, he turned to the only one he trusted his emotions with. He threw his arms around my knees and held on for dear life. I had humiliated him, chastised him, berated him, but I was still all he had. That single incident defined my role. I was a major force in this child's life. Someone said the easiest part of being a mother is giving birth. The hardest part is showing up every day and being mom to those kids. That is a very special calling. Jochebed did it as best she could in the life of Moses, as God had given her the parameters to do that. Third one, I don't know the name. I don't know the name of this person. I just know that this was a woman who was part of two women who came to Solomon. And this is that famous story of Solomon saying, we'll cut the baby in half. So this is a woman who made a split decision. When it was put on the line, she made a decision in the midst of a very difficult moment. And if you're aware of what this is all about, you know that this is probably not a usual Mother's Day scripture that you'd pull from, but you can find the best out of even the worst mother. And this was a situation where we see Solomon, very gifted with wisdom. He had the desire in his heart to want to help the people, so he was out here even as king making judgment. And here comes a judgment that I don't even think Judge Judy or somebody like that has had to deal with anything this out there. What he's got is he's got the fact that you've got these two harlots, prostitutes, whatever word you want to choose, they'd come to him with a very special problem. That's probably the first point, is that there are no perfect mothers. There are no perfect mothers, no perfect dads, obviously, but there are no perfect moms. I heard a story about a mother of three trying to find that swimsuit for the coming summer. And she tried on probably 10 swimsuits. Her mother went with her to do this. And she was getting frustrated and getting increasingly frustrated about trying to find a swimsuit that fit after having 3 kids. And her mother trying to calm her while she was there in the dressing room. She said this, she said, look at it this way. What would you rather have? The husband and 3 children who adore you, or a swimsuit that fits? Before she could even answer, in the next booth over, a lady said, I want a swimsuit that fits. You don't have to be perfect. Believe me, Mom, you don't have to be. You are perfect. And all of us fall short of perfection. And that is certainly something all of us have to deal. And you know, that probably is most evident in our parenting skills. And nobody is perfect. And it's amazing, though, what God can do with so little to work with. That's proven by dads. But with moms, with a heart and a love that they have there. And here you have these 2 ladies. And starting in verse 16, it says that these 2 prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. One of them said this, and this is, again, an interesting story. One of them said, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house. I had a baby while she was there with me. The 3rd day after my child was born, this woman also had a baby. We were alone. There was no one in the house but the 2 of us. During the night, this woman's son died because she lay on him. So she got up in the middle of the night and took my son from my side while I, your servant, was asleep. She put him by her breast and put her dead son by mine. The next morning, I got up to nurse my son, and he was dead. When I looked at him closely in the morning light, I saw that it wasn't my son, the son that I had born. The other woman said, no, the living one, my son, is my son. The dead one is yours. But the first one insisted, no, the dead one is yours. The living one is mine. And so they argued before the king. I would not want to be Solomon at this moment, emotionally charged, no man's land that he's found himself in, and trying to decipher. But even in the midst of this, you know, even in the low morals, you've got this maternal stamp in the heart of this lady. The king says, the one says, my son is alive, and your son is dead, while the other says, no, your son is dead, mine's alive. Then the king said, bring me a sword. So they brought a sword for the king, and he gave the order, cut the living child in 2. Give half to the one and half to the other. Now, I don't think anybody in here would have made that same decree. I know that whenever we have custody battles today, the judge never says, all right, cut them in half. There's always mix it up however they can. But here Solomon says this. It says, the woman whose son was alive was filled with compassion for her son and said, King, please, my lord, give her the living baby, don't kill him. But the other said, neither I nor you shall have him, cut him in two. And the king gave this ruling, give the living baby to the first woman, do not kill him. She is his mother. And here you see that, that's ooh and ah time that came. And often the lesson we bring out of this is how amazing the wisdom of Solomon is. But there's a lesson also here of how amazing this mother's love was. That she would give her child, not just away, but to this other lady with a despicable heart, rather than have her child harmed. And that is something that is just in the DNA of moms. That child comes first and that she comes last. And personal sacrifice is a part of motherhood. That is something they naturally do. Our mothers fed us, nourished us, protected us. They protect us in their own bodies before we were even saw the light of day. Nobody's going to carry me around for 9 months. I don't know anybody here is willing to do that. But my mom did it. They give us sleep for midnight. They give up sleep for midnight feedings. They give up personal goals to help children achieve theirs. They give up a new outfit so that a child can wear something new. They give up that last helping of supper for someone else. And they remind us of our God, who is also sacrificial in giving. Probably the best reminder we have that is the kind of love that God showed a world of sinners. And that God, with a love like that, should not go unnoticed. It says when the Israelites heard the verdict the king had given, that they held the king in awe because they saw that he had wisdom from God to administer justice. Solomon knew what moms looked like. They all look different on the outside, but they're pretty similar on the inside. There is something that God has placed within them that is pretty much the same. I want to close by sharing with you something Max Lucado wrote. He wrote this in a book called The Gentle Thunder. And his question was, Moms, why do you love that newborn child? He says, I know it's a silly question, but indulge me, why do you? For months this baby has brought you pain. They made you break out in pimples and waddle like a duck. Because of them, you craved sardines and crackers and threw up in the morning. They punched you in the tummy. They occupied space that wasn't theirs, ate food they didn't fix. You kept them warm. You kept them safe. You kept them fed. But did they say thank you? Are you kidding? She's no more out of the womb than she starts to cry. The room's too cold. The blanket's too rough. The nurse is too mean. And who does she want? Mom. Don't you ever get a break? Who's been doing the work for the last 9 months? Why can't Dad take over? But no, Dad won't do. The baby wants Mom. She didn't even tell you she was coming. She just came. And what a coming. She rendered you a barbarian. You screamed, you swore, you bit bullets and tore the sheets. And now look at you. Your back aches, your head pounds, your body is drenched in sweat, every muscle strained and stretched. You should be angry, but are you? Far from it, your face is longer than forever love. They've done nothing for you, yet you love them. They brought pain to your body and nausea to your morning, yet you treasure them. Their face is wrinkled and their eyes are dim, yet all you can talk about are the good looks and the bright future. She's going to wake you up every night for 6 weeks, but that doesn't matter. I can see it on your face that you're crazy about her. Why? Why does a mother love her newborn? Because the baby is hers. Even more, because the baby is her. Her blood, her flesh, her sinew and spine, her hope, and her legacy. It bothers her not that the baby gives nothing. She knows a newborn is helpless and weak. She knows babies don't ask to come into this world. And God knows we didn't either. We are His idea. We are His face, His eyes, His hands, His touch. And we are Him. It's good to remember that moms are that small taste of God. That they are the greatest evidence of His love for us that we have outside of Him. That He loves us in spite of that little thing that has marred us, which is that sin in our life. And mothers come along as God comes along and came along and shows his tremendous love. And their love stays the distance like Rizpah did, in spite of all the circumstances. Their love takes the great risks that we see with Jochebed. And their love makes the ultimate sacrifices that we see with that one woman. We need to be thankful. We need to be grateful. Probably the most important thing to do is to communicate that. Because no matter how many times they've heard it, they've never heard it enough of how much they deserve to hear how special they are. Would you bow?